Welcome back for another episode of Inside the Playbook brought to you by the Sports Playbook. This is another special episode where I get the opportunity to interview people involved in sport and see what makes them tick. In this episode, I sit down with Greg Rust, a respected media presenter, commentator, and MC. You may know him from his very own podcast, Rusty's Garage. We talk about Greg's rise through the ranks and how he took opportunities in the media. He also called one of the most famous motorsport events in Australia, the Bathurst 1000. We go in depth about Greg's time at Channel 10 and spoke about his unexpected involvement in one of the most crazy days in the world's history. From this chat, I hope you get to know more about Greg, his amazing contributions to the world of motorsport, but also the amazing advice that Greg shares at the end of the podcast. Without any further ado, it's time to pluck first gear, release the clutch, and get started with this conversation with Greg Rust. Without any further ado, I'd love to introduce my next guest, who you may have heard before on V8 Supercars broadcast, Formula One, or MotoGP in Australia. Greg Rust, welcome to the Sports Playbook.
Daniel, it's nice to be talking with you, and I tend to enjoy what the athletes do rather than talking about my side per se. I've always had this philosophy of being a conduit to hopefully get to the people that you or your listeners or the viewers of the coverage and so on want to hear from, and hopefully answering the questions they think about. But over 20 plus years of working around it, there's been a few little stories that we've enjoyed and been a part of along the way.
Yeah, 100%. And I think I'd firstly like to start the podcast by saying I'm a big fan of yours. Like, I really enjoy watching V8 Supercars, Formula One, and I really enjoyed whenever you're on the podcast. So I'd rather say that from the outset and let you know, because it's it's important to let people know that of how good they are in their field. So thank you for all of your knowledge throughout the years.
Thank you. At heart, I think life and time has taught me the beauty of being a conversationalist. So in those moments where I've been either on, lucky enough to have been on the host desk with, say, a Mark Webber, or in conversation, in a podcast with a Casey Stoner or something or other, they're pinch yourself moments. But I try and keep them as normal as possible. They, like the rest of us, pull their jeans on one leg at a time, just like we do, and they too have moments that are failings, but there are also great things they've achieved in their life. And probably a little bit of what you're tapping into here is what drives them, how they're wired, how they go on to do those things, and just to sit back and understand a bit of that and how special they really are is a very cool thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we get started, I'm actually going to throw some quick fire questions to you.
Go for it.
Just so the listeners can get to know you a little bit more. So firstly, tomato sauce, in or out of the fridge?
Oh, my wife keeps it in the fridge. I'm a fan of it out of the fridge. There you go.
Yeah, that's a good one. Summer or winter?
Summer. I hate the cold. I'm talking to you from New Zealand, where my wife grew up, and I struggle a bit with the cold. I love the warmer weather. When we go to Singapore for the Grand Prix and stuff, it's ace.
Yeah, absolutely. Cats or dogs?
Dogs. Big fan of dogs. We have two here, a Weimaraner called Indy, and another one called Buster, who's a cross Springer Spaniel Border Collie, and he's my shadow. He's nearly 15. Oh, he's 15 years old now, yeah.
Wow, love it. And finally, favorite motorsport track that you've commentated at?
Ooh, that's tough. Because I've also been to some where I haven't commentated and they've been very special moments, like Le Mans and Daytona. Favorite one that I've commentated at, I have a soft spot for Singapore. I've been going there for over a decade doing that. And there's something about Bathurst. Every time you crest that mountain and descend down through sort of Lithgow and head towards, and you can, when you get close enough to see the sign there, I mean, it's hairs on the back of your neck stuff, that place. Pretty special sporting venue.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for that, Rusty. I'm sure our listeners have got to know you pretty quick smart there. But I'd love to understand, I guess, your background and how you developed a passion for motorsport, but just your general upbringing and what that was like for you.
I grew up in Sydney. My father wasn't a competitor per se, but my late dad now, he did business in hydraulics, and he got to work with people like Gary Rush, a 10-time Australian sprint car champion, another guy, Ronnie Wanless, who was a very, very good speedway um, uh, driver. And Dad was taking, and Mum, they were both taking me to the speedway when I was knee high. I can vividly recall going to Liverpool and Parramatta, but before I could even walk, I was going to places like the Sydney Showground, which is now, the movie precinct there, Fox Studios and so on. So back then in the day, they had for the Royal Easter Show and so on, they had a venue where they would, display all different things. But that was also a legendary speedway venue. So it was in the blood for that reason. Dad wasn't a competitor per se, but I just gravitated towards it, Daniel. I always loved it. I constantly talked about cars. My mum would tell you I would drive her mad making car noises, sitting on the lounge with a spatula between the cushions and changing gears and watching Bathurst and stuff like that. So to think all these years later where it ended up, and I like that stuff when I talk to people now, those powerful moments when you're younger and the impact that they have on you. So yeah, Dad wasn't a racer, but he was around them and loved it, and that rubbed off on me massively.
Yeah, and you talk on Bathurst there and the spatter in between the pillows. Do you remember your earliest memories from watching Bathurst and what those moments were like for you?
It was a ritual with my dad and my brother, especially. We would watch from the moment the coverage started. Back then, it was Channel 7 with Mike Raymond and those legendary guys, Gary Wilkinson and so on. And we would watch it till it finished, till the last frame went to air. And it was a day where, Dad might cook a barbecue or whatever, but we were basically glued to the TV for the entire time. We did family holiday road trips. I think in 1980, we did a country road trip around New South Wales and went to Bathurst. And I mean, back then it was well before the beautiful pit setup that we have now. So yeah, so some of those earliest memories of Bathurst go back to, well, probably would have been 10 or 11 or something, I suppose, back then.
Yeah, and would I be correct in saying back then for Bathurst, there was the long straight, so there wasn't the chase at that
Correct.
point?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. So after a massive crash there in the 80s, they built for safety reasons what we now know as the chase, which basically dog legs off at the end of that long straight and creates like a leg, if you will, and you then hook back left, so it slows everything down with the car, and that final hump, which was there, that they would crest at very high speed and get quite light and so on, is basically now gone. But yes, back then it was certainly there.
Yeah, wow. And when you're watching the broadcast and watching Bathurst and any type of motorsport, for you, was it something that broadcast was standing out, or was it more that you were just watching the spectacle and more in awe of what was happening?
And that's actually a very interesting question. So, more the competition probably is the correct answer. But ironically, Mum and Dad would say that I drove them mad with impersonations, right? So doing impersonations of a bit of the commentary and so on was not um, it wasn't just a fixation with a Brock or a Johnson or whoever it may have been and what was happening on the track at the time. There was I figured out pretty quickly that an onboard camera, which Channel 7 pioneered globally, basically, with race cam. I mean, seeing that when it was first in, I think, a Toyota Celica and then later in other cars and so on, I mean, it just transformed our whole world. To be inside the car with the driver and understanding a little bit of their world was a very eye-opening thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can see how far that's come now. Like obviously that those cameras were huge, they were chunky, sat at the back of the seat. But now you look at, say, supercars, you've got the hamburger cam on top of the cars. F1, you've got it in the front splitter. Like to think that that technology came from Australia in the like late 70s, 80s, it really transformed motorsport how we see it today.
And the viewing experience, exactly. And the development that keeps on going, where they just keep thinking of ways to capture it, right? So that tiny little camera that sits inside the helmet that gives you the driver's eye perspective now. I mean, all these sorts of things. I mean, you're absolutely right. It was something that effectively sat in the passenger seat or just rearward of that, and it was a massive structure and quite heavy and what have you to begin with, and now they weigh next to nothing and can be transmitted instantaneously. Yeah, just That's something that we should probably celebrate a bit more of in this country, that it actually started in Australia.
And you touched on there your earliest memories going to Bathurst, but then also all the different experiences you've had. For you, when did it start to become, I guess, a bit more of a thinking point or potentially a reality that you could look towards either broadcast, MC speaking? When did those avenues start to open up for you?
It didn't eventuate until I was about 20. So I actually left high school and began working with the ANZ Bank, which I know you know from a relative. Back then there was like a management traineeship program, which I was a part of, and I learnt about, uh, lending for consumers around home loans, personal loans, and so on, and small business loans and assessing those. I can still use that side of my brain, but I don't enjoy it as much now. I mean, that was all number crunching back then. Now it's kind of very on the creative side that what I'm doing. Um, and I was racing karts. I'd done some club level motorsport, Daniel. I was very grassroots, some carnacrosses, rally sprints. I bought a car with some high school mates. We went thirds in it, and it was a great learning experience. So people now, when we talk about them going via the Motorsport Australia pathways, there are lots of great grassroots things like that you can do to give you a taste of it. It keeps it off the street, which is a really good thing. And it's an entree into motorsport. So I did a bit of that. And I also had a supercart, and I got to race at places like Oran Park, Amaroo, Sydney Motorsport Park, and so on. And the karts were invited to be a part of a thing called the Triple Challenge, which was held on the Australia Day long weekend every year. It was non-championship for touring cars, or what we now know as supercars. They had super bikes. At night time, when everything finished, they would fire up the drag strip and they'd go drag racing with the proper top fuel cars. And they would also get some of the supercars. Like I can remember Wayne Gardner in the Coca-Cola Commodore having a run off against Glenn Seaton in the Falcon down the drag strip, right? So this was a really cool concept that brought all these different forms of motorsport together. And the karts were there. The highest category of the karts was their racing, but in a more of a showcase capacity. And they said, "Oh, will you go along and talk to the guys on the big screen commentary?" And I said, "I don't want to do that, you know." And they said, "No, no, 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 you'll be good at it. They're just going to ask you questions, and off you go." So I did that. At the end of it, the guy producing it said to me, "Have you done this before?" I said, "No." He said, "Do you want to do it again?" I said, "Yes." And literally 2 weeks later, I was in the pit lane at Oran Park working on the PA, interviewing, I mean, doing truck racing of all things and sports sedans and stuff like that, and interviewing the now late Rodney Crick and so on. And it started from there. So the stuff over the PA was a great place to learn and make mistakes, taught you to talk your way out of any situation. And in later life, when you were being considered for other jobs and so on that were much higher up the rank around television and so on, they liked the fact that you'd had that grounding for a number of years because it taught you so much, so that when things go wrong in broadcasting, you're comfortable talking. You can, not big periods of dead air and so on. So it was very, very good way to learn. And I juggled that. I had a good boss in finance who would go to the Australian Motorcycle Grand Prix every year. He knew that I was doing a bit of moonlighting, and he said, "Hey, you should pursue that." And I kind of came to this arrangement with him where he said, "Why don't you work for me a couple of days a week on like a freelance basis, and then you can go off on the weekend and chase that." And so I did that with his blessing, which was amazing. And about 12 months later, I was coming towards his office, and he goes, "I know why you're here. I know why you're here. Just go." And he encouraged me to go. And I tic-tac with him a little bit now on social media and so on. Um, so there's a number of things in that. Firstly, not being afraid to pivot and jump and try something new. My father and my grandfather had both been in business, and I thought they would freak out and would be a bit uptight about that. And they couldn't have been more supportive. They were very, very supportive. And Dad sort of said to me, "Give it, an honest couple of years and really work hard and see where it will lead you. Don't be 65 going, 'Oh, I really should have had a go at that or tried this or whatever.'" And yeah, mate, away it went.
Yeah, I'm really curious about one thing that you touched on there. Probably the first question off the back of it was during school, did you enjoy or find opportunities for public speaking, or was that kind of your first, array into like speaking in front of a crowd.
No, I'd done a little bit of it at school. I was in debating, and my own kids now, they're one of them is nearly finished high school, and the other one's in university. And I always encourage them at school when those opportunities come up to do them. And I think school is a lot more proactive about helping kids to do that now than they perhaps were in my years. So I mean, I had a couple of little small leadership roles, and so some of that stuff means that you're required to do a bit of speaking. I was horribly nervous, I'll be very honest with you, back then, and it took me even a long time once I'd started commentating and in television to to get comfortable in myself and to realize that that is not acting. It's some. I mean, I think when I first started, I thought, far out. There's this responsibility to be the big professional broadcaster and to appear as such. And yeah, there's absolutely that level of polish around the edges that you need. But actually, what people want is for you to be you. And when I realized that, it was a massive light switch moment in the whole thing around my ability to be comfortable talking either in an MC environment or a television environment. I got to do things that were so out of my scope it wasn't even funny, from the project and some morning television, Channel 10 and so on, talking about all sorts of different things. And then in later years, Winter Olympics and Commonwealth Games, and they're great ways to test you and to grow your broadcasting ability, even though you still have a love of motor racing. So yeah, much more comfortable with it now. I still think, even as I sit here now, I would, I would happily go off and do some study around some of that stuff as to how to get better. And I enjoy the emceeing a lot. I do a lot of that in the corporate space, and I have some thoughts at the moment. I haven't executed it, but I have some thoughts at the moment around doing more of the public speaking side of it around particular subject matter. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. When you first got your start in that kind of PA area and those type of experiences, did you feel like there, I guess there was a safety blanket in a way where you were kind of not in a shield, but you were doing these announcements at motorsport events? Did you feel a bit more comfortable in those environments rather than being so heavily on the broadcast side? Does that sort of
That does
make
make sense. I the first thing I thought of is that you could hear your voice over the PA, so you would think, "Oh my God, I don't want to A, swear, B, say something wrong, or because that's it's out there."
Mm,
So I did think about that, and as I progressed through television, I then realised the simplicity of that environment. That if you did make a mistake, you could pick up and keep going with less impact, if you will, or less harm. So I think I didn't immediately realize it, but I grew to understand that this is a good grounding. And I had some good people around me too, I should point out. So I got to work with David Tapp, who is the son of legendary horse racing caller Johnny Tapp. And David had been working for Channel 9 at that stage and in a few other areas. And he encouraged me to go off and to do some training. So I did do some training back then with stuff attached to to Macquarie University at the Film, Television and Radio School there and so on, which is very, very good. So there were a couple of people like that were good mentors, if you will. And then when I got my first radio job, it was with 2GB, who are now the number one AM station in Sydney. And I did everything there, from bit of producing, sports announcing, reading the sports news, and then progressing through to normal everyday news reporting, and then nighttime and eventually daytime news reading before I left there. And at that time, 2GB isn't what it is now, but it was emerging from its tough run, if you will, and it was building, and it was really good to be there in that building phase. So I got to work with Jason Morrison, who went on to become the director of news at Channel 7, chief of staff there, very, very good journalist. David Spears, who's now on the ABC and does all of their political stuff, and prior to that was with Sky, a very good reporter. Paul Murray, who you'll know now. So all of these guys were there, and then on the sports side, Andrew Moore, who's a very good rugby league caller with the ABC, and Trevor Long, who's now the gadget guy on the Today Show on Channel 9 and like real tech expert. So there were all these people, and we were all pitching in, and you just I find myself to be a very good hands-on learner. And when you're around good people like that, you soak it all up, right? So that was huge for me in that next step of going from the grounding of the PA and the early learnings to broadening the horizons, if you like.
Yeah, and did you find that 2GB was that experience itself? Did you find you had your most growth in that area that to propel you to the next stage? Like, what was that? What was
I,
that
I,
like?
I would argue that yes, for a couple of reasons, because some of it was sport that I wasn't hugely familiar with. So that was good for me to do that, being around those people that I rattled off there before. And you've got to be a bit hands on. So sometimes you'll go and do around the ground stuff and you've got to plug in your own equipment and set yourself up and check things. And again, that was another side that I hadn't had to worry about before. So learning all of that was great. I did that in unison with some television stuff for SBS and then some introductory freelance stuff for Channel 10 before I got an opportunity to take over from my good buddy in Lee Diffie, who's now in the United States, who you might know, who's gone on to do some incredible things around the Olympics and IndyCar and NASCAR and so on. Just an A grade, ultra professional broadcaster. And he was moving on to the supercars, and the 2 liter Super Touring Championship with the Audis and BMWs and so on was on the same channel, and they wanted to separate the commentary team, so the broadcasts were different. And I got a great chance to work on that. The little production team that I worked on with that, I still work with to this day around the Australian Grand Prix and the MotoGP at Phillip Island and so on. So they're great lifelong friends, and that's probably where I took the biggest steps in a motorsport broadcasting sense, because then you're around people, Daniel, that knew how to make quality television, knew how to help shape you because you were still green. And the people in the pit lane, I think, providing you weren't a tosser and you went about it the right way, and I tried to do that, they were very embracing. You know, Brad Jones and all these other people, they wanted to see you grow and succeed. So all of that, the culmination of all of that was a huge thing for me.
Yeah, and you speak about your Channel 10 experience there. Do you remember your very first race that you commentated at or were involved in a motorsport capacity?
I did a powerboat race of all things, but that was to tape. So that was a post-produced show. So I went to a studio in Sydney. I went to a studio in Sydney and called that off the tube. But the first real big thing that I did was the super touring stuff, and back then they were post-produced like the British Touring Car Championship. But I mean, you were in the studio with either a Greg Murphy and an Andy Raymond, or like properly good racers or commentators. So I learned a lot from that. And then in a live sense, I got a chance with 10 to be in the pit lane in the late 90s at Sandown and Bathurst, and I remember thinking how huge that was, how massive that was, how daunting that was. But the live stuff is very addictive because you can't screw it up. You get one chance. You got to be proactive, reactive. You've got to be creative around the storytelling, and it's over time I've come to appreciate that it's as much about the contest as it is the competitor or the human being, and I love the human element of it and try and get to that as much as possible, because you've got the racers there with you that acutely know the intricacies of what's going on strategically or mechanically with the car and so on.
I think it's a good point there because often we look at motorsport and you look at the people that are on track racing to the stopwatch, but then you take the helmet off and you get to know the human itself. You get a greater appreciation to what the human is, but also the athlete and how they think and operate. I always enjoy like listening to the likes of say a Jamie Whincup, because the way he perceives things and looks at things is I think quite different to how other races think of it. Like, if you like me, you like me. If you don't, so be it. Like,
Yep. Yep. I mean, he's a great human being, right? So all these people that, say, oh, he's boring or da 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 da. Well, hang on. Let's just stop and look at the records. They speak for themselves, what he achieved. And
mm.
if you can try and tap in to something that unlocks a bit of conversation with him, that sparks a bit of interest with him, you'll be away. So I always enjoy catching up with him. Yeah. So I mean, there are prickly ones at times. You've got to do your best to figure a way to to break down the barriers with them. Sometimes that's as much about your preparation as it is your read of the situation at the time. So you look at body language. Sometimes when you start it, they're tense or they're not fully engaged, and you've got to find a way to break the ice with that. Maybe a little bit of humor. I can remember Kimi Räikkönen, and they said to me, look, we're because he's can be robotic, obviously, but more and more over social media, we've seen funny stuff from him, right?
Mm.
So they said to me, can you sit down with him and have a chat? But we want to try and, you know, break the ice man a bit. Okay, no worries. So I went off and did a bit of homework, and I figured out that he loved these custom motorcycles, right? These very expensive choppers that were handcrafted, more or less. And so we opened the batting with a bit of that, and talked a bit about some of the ones that he bought and so on. And then I hit him with, hey, Kimmy, whatever it is, a bit of talk. This might be your final year with Ferrari. And he smiled and he goes, it's just the bullshit's in the papers, like. And so forgive my swearing there, right? But
No, it's fine.
that's exactly what he said.
Yeah.
And then I thought that's great. We've actually got a laugh out of him, and we've found a way to unglue him a little bit. So, yeah, I've learned a lot about that over time. I was very daunted when I did that first live stuff at Sandown. I can remember Alan Jones's car. I think it broke an axle or a diff or something on the start line. And so they didn't even do a lap, and it was back in the garage, and I had to go and interview the 1980 world champion. And I'd worked with him a year or two beforehand at the Bike Grand Prix at Eastern Creek for Channel 9 in a one-off appearance with them.
Mm.
And I can remember thinking I got on super well with him then, but he was seething with this thing that had gone wrong. And here am I trying to do an interview with him. And Barry, it was my first dealings with Barry Sheen, and he was awesome. And he kind of smoothed the situation. He goes, "Yeah, AJ, look, he's just doing his job, mate." Yeah, yeah.
And with like in that moment there, you approach Alan Jones, like you said, 1980 world champion. Are you are you trembling with fear? Are you going like, what do I do in this situation? Or do you just kind of go back to your roots and go, no, I know the reason why I'm here. I'm good at what I do. I'm going to get that piece of like that scoop that everyone's looking for.
I think the moment you get overconfident is the moment it doesn't work as well, or you don't succeed. I think you've got to have a little bit of nerves in you, because that's normal. That's you're only human to do that.
Mm.
But you also have to summon up a bit of confidence to um, ask the question, ask it fairly. Make sure you chase it in a balanced sense. I'm huge on that, right? So if I go to, in that example, let's say I went to Alan and someone had run into him or something, I would make a point of either me or another pit reporter going and getting the other side too, so that we covered both as best we could. Um, I would hope that I'd think about a question that I wanted to ask, and then also react to some of the things that he says. You've got to listen. You've got to listen to what they say. You've been doing that already in this chat, which is great. And formulate some questions off that. But you're also very lucky too, because in your ear at the time is a pit lane producer, and invariably they're another set of eyes and ears, and they're listening to what's going on and knowing where the coverage is going to go. Maybe they're aware of more information that you're not as well. Okay, like race controller saying that's a penalty or something or other. So you can actually then convey that to the person live in the moment sometimes, right? So, but it's all about how you do that, Daniel. It's all about your empathy with them, your choice of words. I think I'm not a believer. I began this conversation by saying I'm a conduit. I'm not a star. The stars are the drivers, the teams. That's how I really believe it to be. And I think if you do all of those things or come at it from all of those perspectives, they'll see that, they'll garner that, and or respect that, I should say, and they'll generally react to it. And you know what? If they don't, I don't get beat up about that anymore. I frame it as, oh, well, that was in the moment. They're a bit uptight or whatever. That's if I was in their shoes, maybe I'd be the same. And I
Mm.
leave it like that. And oftentimes you'll get off air if, in the very, very rare moments where that's happened, often they'll call you. They'll go, "Hey, mate, sorry, mate, I've calmed down a bit now, and this is where I was coming from, and da 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 da," and then you'll just express your stuff too. But it's never ended up in a heated thing for me like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and you touched on a good point there where I think some people might not understand the insides of a broadcast and how that works for motorsport. It's very unique having a pit lane or a producer rather in your ear telling you what's happening, what's going on. In the first instance, did you find that distracting at all, or did you feel like a sense of comfort that having someone in your ear giving you a bit of direction? How did that feel from your side?
It depends on the person that's working with you. The really good ones are succinct and they pick their moment to tell you things. It's really like the parallels at times between motor racing and motor race broadcasting are uncanny. So
Mm.
it's a bit like an engineer talking to the driver on track. They try and pick their moments, right? Where the driver's not got their hands full in a battle or it's not a sequence of corners that's tricky. They're trying to find a little straight or a little somewhere where they can convey that information, right?
Yeah.
It's very similar. So short, succinct commands are good. Um, not long sentences, because if that happens, if they're giving you a massive long sentence, sometimes that can take away from your ability to fully focus on the interview you're doing or something, right? So at first it was off-putting, 100%, and there are still days where it can be off-putting depending upon how the audio is configured. We've got some very, very good audio people around supercars and Formula One and so on that will help you get it to a manner that works for you. You learn to take it in, digest, keep calm, and then you might be 3 or 4 words behind, but then you can bring it out if you need to. And it's a bit of an art form. Not everyone can do it. I don't know that I'm perfect at it, but I got to work with Billy Woods, who was the host of Channel 10's Motorsport in the halcyon days, right in the early 2000s. There, when they had Bathurst, IndyCar, MotoGP, Formula One, they picked up in 2003, I think, and so on. And it was just a golden period of motor racing being in one place. And I walked into an RPM show one Sunday. I was reporting. He was the host, and the producer came to him and said, "Hey, mate, we need an opener. Can you write us a minute opener? Very emotive. We want it to tell these things. We're going to cover this in the show." And da 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 da. He just sat at his computer and just went, and it was like poetry. And he churned it out within minutes. I've got a lot better at that. I still don't think I can do it as good as Billy. He's a very, very good storyteller. And he and I were at the Superbikes at Phillip Island once, and we had a total not a power failure, sorry, some light bulbs smashed in the studio. So like glass was shattering in front of the camera and on the ground in front of him, and he was super cool and calm. He relayed that to the audience. He did it with this calmness, and no one was worried at home. He continued to interview the person. And I think they said to him, "Hey, we need like a minute or a minute and a half here to get us to the next thing. Can you just talk? We've got to get, back then it would have been tape. We've got to get a story up and it's not quite ready or something or other." And he did all that with ease, with absolute ease. So you learn from people like that about remaining calm. You've got lots of assets at your fingertips. If there's someone there with you, you can talk to them, interview them. If you've got some information about what's coming up in the show, some statistics, some whatever, there's always a way. And before you know it, a minute and a half goes like that, right? So he was. There's lots of different people along the way, but he was a very good one in a kind of mentor sense for me about learning to write the way you um, cover certain things and the empathy that I talked about before and so on. He was very good at that, Billy.
I think, Rusty, it's time for our first photo. Are you
Oh
ready
God,
for it?
God, here we go. Go for it. Yeah.
It's from the Channel 10 days. Let me
Oh
know
yes, yes. So
if you
this
can
was
see that.
this was a promo they ran in magazines. This is my first year when I've got the stupid windswept hair. So I've had Mark Scaife on the pod. I've had Neil Crompton on the pod. I've had Ali Drower on the pod and all that sort of stuff. We regularly talk about the late great Barry Sheen. I'm still in contact with Mark Osler, who's in that photo quite regularly. He does a lot of stuff with Shannon's. And Baz is obviously no longer with us and much missed. But yeah, they used to do these promo photos, and oh my God, I look so out of place in them. But anyway, yes, yes, that is around. That is still around, Daniel. Thank you for bringing that up.
I mean, it's a Google search, and I was like, oh,
Okay.
that's a pretty good gem.
Yes, yes, Jim. Yes.
And I think you touched on a good point there where in sports broadcasts at the moment, it's quite popular that broadcast rights are split. They're gone everywhere. Like one's at Stan Sport, one's KO Sport. Wherever it is, it's really hard to find everything in one place. But
Correct.
you said there, Channel 10 in that golden period had everything. How important was that for a likes of Channel 10? Because no doubt their viewership would have boosted because of being all in one place. How important do you think that period was for Channel 10 and
I, I,
motorsport?
I look at it now as a special era. I mean, we're talking 20 years ago now, rather. Um, some of it I think is fortuitous. A lot of it I put down to very good management. So there was a fellow there by the name of David White at the time, who was my boss at 10. He was a tough boss, but a very, very good boss as well. And he knew his motor racing. He'd come through television. He'd done stuff, I think, for memory as a cameraman in Tasmania, and he understood about sports rights acutely. And that's the space that he's gone on to work in very successfully in London and New York. And David saw the benefit of gathering all these properties, having them all under the one roof, which was not easy to do, but probably more feasible, I should say, back then than it is now. And then he had some good salespeople around him that he knew they could bulk sell this. They could package it up and go, okay, Shannon's, but we'll give you a little bit of stuff around the Gold Coast IndyCar, and what about if we do some stuff with Rally and maybe the magazine show RPM and so on, and you could offer different things to the client depending upon how much they wanted to spend. So that was one side of it. The other side of it was them bringing together great people, but also giving them opportunity. I mean, they gave a wonderful opportunity to Lee Diffie, and he worked immensely hard, I should say, Daniel. So a lot of it was down to him, but they gave him the opportunity. He went off overseas and did a few things and was able to come back, and they welcomed him back, which was great. And they also mixed it with some legends. I mean, to get Barry Sheen in, the two-time 500cc world champion, who was just this awesome character, it was a masterstroke. It was an absolute masterstroke. The Australian people loved him, his cheeky kind of sense of humour and so on. And then you complemented that with Mark Osler, who'd been at Channel 7, so he's a known quantity. He was a part of their lineup. He's now with 10. So it was really smart. You were creating something fresh and new, but with a couple of staple things. And I think that's why the audience warmed to it so well. You were changing it, but it wasn't wholesale change. When you make wholesale change, you know what human beings are like. They get used to things. They get used to, oh, that's my thing, right? And if you change it completely, that's when I think the audience struggles to accept it, but they really did accept this, and it was very, very well done.
Yeah. Did you? I don't know the answer to this question, but it's more of a curious one. When you were at Channel 10, were there ever a time where the broadcast rights came to an end and there was, I guess, uncertainty within a broadcast team, or did Channel 10 do a good job of kind of keeping the rights on for as long as they could?
They did, for probably nigh on a decade or close there too. I mean, they started out with on the two-wheel side and with rally and so on, and then that at a very similar time that morphed into the addition of supercars, and then later on Formula One. I mean, they had everything, IndyCar. So at about 2006, the conversations that supercars were having, they were wanting to explore new opportunities. I think 10 put what they thought was the best possible deal at the time for them. But supercars went to 7, and it was a heartbreaking thing, and it was a real line in the sand moment for lots of people. I mean, Lee had a great opportunity to go to America, so he went off and did that. Daryl and I stayed. David gave me a great opportunity to take over some of the hosting with different things. Bill had gone into news. And I did have an offer from Channel 7. I got to the point where there was a contract. I could have gone and worked in the pit lane. There was some tic-tacking there, which was very flattering. But in a growth as a broadcaster sense, yes, I missed supercars. It was heartbreaking not being at the events and being in the pit lane and so on. But the reality is I got to learn and do so much more in that period where they weren't with us, that helped me a lot as the broadcaster that I am today. And then even later on, opening doors to Winter Olympics and Commonwealth Games and World Sailing Championships and boxing, and just stuff that was totally outside my comfort zone, but very, very good for me.
I hope you've enjoyed part A of my conversation with Greg Rust. We will be back shortly with part B, but until then, we will catch you on the next play.